Good afternoon, and welcome to UCEA Google Plus Hangouts on Air. This is Angel Nash, Graduate Research Assistant and Doctoral Student at UCEA Headquarters at the University of Virginia. I'm here today to interview Dr. Azadeh Osanloo as a part of her candidacy for the UCEA Executive Committee. Today, listeners will be hearing from Azadeh Osanloo, an Associate Professor at the New Mexico State University. Her research focuses on issues of educational equity, social justice leadership and policy, the philosophical foundations of education, diversity, multiculturalism, human rights, and bullying intervention. Welcome, Dr. Osanloo.
Hi, Angel. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure, too. Let's begin with the first question. Please tell us about your background and your scholarship as it relates to leadership preparation and practice.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think my background in scholarship begins when I was an educator working in K-12 schools in New York City, specifically the South Bronx. I began as a teacher, and my heart is still with working with students. While I was teaching, I was also a program director at a not-for-profit working with disenfranchised middle school students in Harlem. From there, as I began my academic career and after receiving my doctorate from Arizona State University, I came to New Mexico State, where I have been for 8 years. As an associate professor, I am responsible for teaching the courses in educational, multicultural, and social justice leadership. Within this, I work primarily with our master's and doctoral students, but have had the luxury and privilege of working with some undergrads as well. Last year, I was appointed the endowed chair for the improvement of border and rural schools in the state of New Mexico. It's specifically the Stan Fulton Endowed Chairship. The focus of this endowed chairship is to help build and establish collaborative projects and events with practitioners, educational leaders in other schools and different school districts throughout the state of New Mexico. I've been fortunate to work with a great many principals and a few associate superintendents in this endeavor. Last year I had what was called Community Conversations, which was bringing together academicians, community members, and educators in the K-12 arena to talk about issues of race, ethnicity, gender, and primary language in New Mexico. I was fortunate to engage with 8 different community groups, including the NAACP, the League of Women's Voters, and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So I have been working for and with educational leaders for the last 12 years. One of my most favorite things to talk about is that as of this fall, I will have graduated 16 doctoral students who have each completed their dissertations focusing on social justice and educational leadership. All 16 of my students come from minoritized backgrounds, which include gender, sexual orientation, language, ethnicity, and 15 of the 16 are women, which is very exciting for me. And several were first-generation college students. And then in terms of my publications and research, I have a litany of publications that are all written under the umbrella of social justice leadership and racial equality. That is how I could encapsulate my publications. Currently, I'm working on some publications that are inclusive of many stakeholders, including students, teachers, administrators, and university faculty. It is important for me to get the perspectives of people within the pipeline of education so that we keep the research dynamic coming from an organic perspective and using, I guess, what Gramsci would term as organic intellectuals. So I'm happy to say that 2 of the books I'm working on right now include chapters from students as young as elementary school all the way up the ladder to academicians in education. So I guess that would be a little bit about my background and my scholarship in terms of leadership preparation.
Wonderful. You have served for several years as a plenary session representative. Tell us about your engagement in UCEA's governance.
Well, Angel, if it's okay, I'm going to collapse questions 2 and 3 because they're somewhat similar, and I think I'll be giving a holistic view that will sort of address both of those questions.
Absolutely.
So should I read question 3, or do you mind reading it?
Oh, I'm happy to. Question 3 asks, in what other ways have you been engaged in UCEA?
Thank you. Um, Initially, and just a few years into my academic career, I was elected as a plenum representative, and I served from 2009 to 2012. And then this last year, I was also asked to serve again as plenum rep, so that just started in 2014. In addition to being the plenum representative and participating in the plenum and all plenum activities, including voting on different bylaws, I have been a Barbara Jackson Scholar Mentor for 4 years. I was a Clark Fellow Advocate and nominator for a few of my students. I was also editor for the Implications series from 2012 to 2014, where there were 2 articles published within that, or briefs, if you will, one on anti-bullying and one on Hispanic serving institutions. I am currently one of the 2014 convention co-chairs, which is it's an honor to work with the UCEA headquarters staff as well as my colleagues and other convention co-chairs. I was able to help coordinate the first ever UCEA and ASH joint presentation. This is going to be held town hall style, and the topic is Weaving Research and Policy for Inclusion and Human Rights in Global Education. And then another exciting special session I was able to work on was the Ed Talk number 2. The idea of the Ed Talk, it is a derivative from the popular TED Talk series, and this Ed Talk is entitled The State of Racial Justice and Human Rights. I'd also like to think that my background in public policy and civic education has been able to help me participate in a meaningful way with UCEA. Because my master's degree is in public policy, focusing on civicism and civic orientation for youth and post-secondary students, I feel like I'm able to bring an interesting perspective to the table, as well as understand public policy and how to demystify the idea of policy so as many stakeholders as possible can become involved and invested. So that would be my answer to the collapsed questions 2 and 3.
Thank you. Can you discuss with us your scholarship, research projects, teaching, and/or service that can inform the work of UCEA, particularly the work of the Executive Committee?
Yes, absolutely. And a little bit of this may be repeated, but it's still pertinent to this question. I think it is helpful that I have a background in the philosophy of education as well as in public policy. For me, philosophical ideas and ideations of education are very connected towards policy making. So I think that would be one way. I also have a background in ESL. That was my minor at the University of Wisconsin. And I have been working with ESL students, primarily post-secondary, since I was 19 years old and working at a community college in Madison with adult ESL students. Again, I think the idea of demystifying educational policy and writing it in a manner that is multi-stakeholder friendly, I think that is an asset and something that could help push or direct some policy through UCEA that many constituents would be able to get behind. Oftentimes, policy legislation is a little bit, the way it can be written can possibly not involve certain groups of people. So my idea is to involve as many people as possible, especially folks in the community, students and their parents. I think also in reference to that, I do a good job at marrying the academy with school districts and other personnel. I have been working in school districts and working with school districts since I began my term as a teacher. And so I feel like I'm able to create that bridge between the academy, UCEA, as well as school districts. I also think in terms of my anti-bullying research, it comes from an educational leadership perspective. Most of the anti-bullying literature comes from a curriculum and instruction or counseling perspective. So I think the fact that this involves educational leaders and the anti-bullying research, legislation, and policy is important, and this is sort of a burgeoning area that needs a lot of attention. Also, I do some work in human rights education and leadership. I was recently nominated for the Human Rights Education USA Steering Committee, and I would love to be able to build some partnership between that organization and UCEA, as I think human rights education, leadership, and pedagogy can easily be linked with social justice leadership and diversity and multicultural issues. I also think that my experience working at a Hispanic serving institution, which is also land grant and majority women, would be an interesting perspective to bring to the table. I have a Southwest borderland perspective, which is indicative of many different cultures, nationalities, languages, as well as obviously different countries. So I have a, I'd say, an interesting global perspective that I could bring to the table, which would work with a enormously growing demographic and population in this country. So I think working with a primarily Hispanic population and understanding their needs, their assets, is a great way to go about understanding the education of this group, as well as bringing it to the forefront in the table at UCEA. Finally, I would say that another one of my successes and things that may be able to influence the Barbara Jackson Scholars Program or the Clark Fellowship would be my ability to recruit, retain, and graduate students of color or scholars of color. I have done great work in that area, mentoring scholars of color, working with scholars of color, and inviting more scholars of color to the educational leadership playing field is something that is a passion of mine, which I'm also able to sort of make dues and make promise on. As I said, this fall will be my 16th doctoral student after 7.5 years in the academy, and I know maybe while it shouldn't be, it is the most favorite part of my job, and I really love it. So I think those are the ways that I would be able to inform the work of UCEA at the executive committee level, and I'm happy to do so if elected.
Great. And to wrap up our conversation, will you share the reasons why you have chosen to run for the executive committee and your vision for the future of UCEA?
Yes. First, I would love to build partnerships with school districts and leaders for anti-bullying policy and initiatives. Many states currently do not have any anti-bullying policy, and it falls under civil rights issues. So I think by helping school districts and state education systems develop statewide or at least district-wide anti-bullying policy would be something I would love to do, and one of the visions I have for the future of UCEA. I also say that in terms of human rights education partnerships and civic partnerships, that would be a pathway I would love to assist UCEA to go down. I also think that I would be able to help because I'm innately familiar with racial, ethnic, and global issues by working through a Hispanic serving institution that's a land grant. I think one of my visions for the future of UCEA, which aligns with where I currently work, is promoting scholars and professors of color as well as practitioners. I would like to see UCEA continue down the path of pluralistic diversity, and that's absolutely an opportunity for growth, where I could see UCEA being a lodestar organization for this, sort of being the front runner in terms of inclusivity and pluralistic diversity. I also think that, I guess I'll finally say that I consider myself a well-rounded, holistic academician. I am equal parts research and scholarship, teaching and mentoring, as well as service. I went from a practitioner to an academician, so I'm very familiar with those pathways. And again, that would help and assist me to encouraging more educators and recruiting and retaining more professors of color into the academy. You know, I myself am an unrepresented ethnic minority woman, and so I think I'm able to do that sort of work in an authentic and meaningful manner. So I think those are the ways that I feel like I can include my vision with the future of UCEA.
Thank you for your time and thoughtful responses, Dr. Osanloo. This interview will be archived on the UCEA Google Plus page and the UCEA YouTube channel. Listeners can access or share their interview at any time. We also encourage listeners to post comments and questions on the interview in the comments on the UCEA Google Plus page. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Have a great day.